So thank you for joining our session this month. My name is Dimitri. I am one of the organizers. Alongside me, we have Bill and Dave that are also helping keeping this group alive and taking care of the month-to-month activities. So let's talk about the agenda for today. So we'll recap some of the updates from Microsoft 365 since we've last met. I know we skipped last month's session because Collab Days was taking place the day after. So we have quite a few things to catch up on. Just to keep things cardinal, we are not including updates from Ignite in today's presentation. I think this quick 5 to 10 minute intro would not do Ignite sufficient justice. We will have that for next month. We'll have this featured presentation. We'll have some Q&A, some community chats. We'll talk about other events that are happening in the area. We'll close it out with a raffle and some networking. So the previous session, which was in September, Richard Harbridge did a great presentation on communications in the AI-driven digital workplace, with Microsoft 365. If you weren't able to join us live, the recording is available on YouTube with our YouTube channel here at the bottom. All right, let's talk about some updates. So the first kind of overarching feature we'd like to talk about is called Microsoft Places. And this is a feature that everyone's been asking for, especially since the pandemic and hybrid work really became commonfold. So Microsoft Places allows you to define where you are working and essentially allow others to see that and understand if you're in the same building, if you're in the same area, if everyone's remote, if you're looking to schedule a meeting and you want to book on a day when everyone could be in person, especially for things like brainstorming sessions and so forth. So Microsoft's solution to that is called Microsoft Places. And although Places as a whole is currently in preview, the private preview is actually ending in January, but a lot of the features that are part of it are starting to roll out. So the first part is the ability for you to add your location to part of your presence within Microsoft Teams. So this should be rolled out to everybody by the end of this month. So if you go over into your availability, you can specify if you're working from the office, remote, or you can even add the next level of detail of which building you're working out of, especially if there's multiple buildings in your campus. And as part of that, it would be visible to everyone that hovers over your name. If you're in a chat with somebody, like in this bottom right screenshot, you'll be able to hover over the location indicator and see exactly what they've set as their location. As Microsoft Places becomes more and more closer to GA, corporations will have the ability to curate what those work locations are, just so that everyone has a unified way of finding where each other are. Microsoft Places will also have the ability for you to upload floor plans and campus plans, building plans, so it could truly understand if you are near somebody and not in an office that's 40 miles away. So along the same lines, here's a few other additional experiences where if you're inside of a meeting, you'll be able to now see where that person is joining from. Like in this case, is in building 3. You over yourself in your remote, you'll see that, and it'll even know if somebody's nearby if you hover over that icon. The next thing is Microsoft is putting some AI intelligence around like bookable desks. So think like hoteling space in your office where you might have a docking station, screens, mouse, keyboard, etc. You just plug it in. So if it learns that people that are sitting in that desk are constantly referring back to their building that they're in, it's going to start to automatically be able to assign that to you once you plug into that location. And furthermore, if you book that desk, if it's not just free space, but you have to book it, you can also start tying back that in Microsoft Places back to where it is. Another new feature rolling out to Microsoft Teams is brand impersonation protection. We've seen this pop up with a few of our clients where somebody creates a Microsoft 365 tenant using a bogus name and then tries to reach out to other individuals over Teams saying that I'm with Microsoft support, give me your password. And they're evolving. This is especially true for tenants that do not have a whitelist of other domains that they allow to have chats with. So if you're Open Federation, which is the default setting, your company might be susceptible to this kind of attack, so new protections coming. All right, another feature that's coming soon is to be able to customize your sites with fonts and themes. So Microsoft is unlocking the ability to use fonts besides their default font. To everyone that's been in building intranets for over a decade with SharePoint, knows that this is a feature that was very readily available. Microsoft's initial positioning was that by limiting the design flexibility, it made it easier to take those experiences onto mobile devices, tablets, and so forth. I would agree with some of it, especially around the section layouts and whatnot. But in terms of the font, it always just seemed like it was a bit of a miss. In any case, that's now coming soon.
Font and color.
So quick show of hands, is anybody still using InfoPath forms? Refuses to die. But going forward, if you do not have any active InfoPath forms in your tenant, Microsoft is going to be able to start shutting that service off for your tenant permanently. So even though Microsoft promised InfoPath will continue to live on until a certain date in 2026, they really are encouraging to get off InfoPath.
So you want me to make new ones?
So if you're not using it in your tenant, my understanding is that you won't be able to open old ones that haven't been touched in a long time either. Microsoft OneNote for Windows 10. So if everyone remembers the OneNote app that came preloaded with Windows that everybody hated, that app is going away. There was such a big outcry from that version that Microsoft reverted back to the, I think at the time, 2013 version of OneNote, then continuing to progress that forward. But if you do have users that are still using that old built-in version, it's time to get them. Another feature rolling out is the Defender for O365 toolbar buttons for Outlook for Mac. So if you have Defender for O365 today, this is your email protection. Within Outlook, you can choose to have a report, fish, report junk. And if you're getting attacked with like a phishing scheme, Microsoft will use that to retroactively pull out emails that might have been delivered into other mailboxes already. Now this feature is becoming available for Mac as well. Windows Server 2025 is now generally available. So if you have any 2019 environments, I hope you don't, because mainstream support has ended earlier this year. If you have 2022 environments, you're safe for about another couple of years. But now is a good time to start planning for that eventual 2025 deployment. All right, there's a new public preview of a new Microsoft Project Agent for Planner. And this is essentially a Copilot-like experience where you're able to tell this project manager to go and create a project from scratch, from a template. You can assign tasks to this project manager. They can generate reports. It's pretty cool. It's going to be on by default, and it's available to people that are licensed for a project for the web. There's another new feature coming called Portfolios. So if you were using Microsoft Project Online previously, Portfolios was one of those Project Plan 5 features that Plan 3 did not have. And this allows you to see roll-ups across multiple project plans to see where you are as a whole. You could have shared resource allocations. You could basically manage your entire PMO out of one location. So this feature is coming to Planner. As we all know, Project for the Web and Planner are being merged together. So now if you have the premium Planner license, which used to be called Project for the Web license, plans 3 or 5, you'll now have this portfolio feature available. So super helpful if you're overseeing multiple projects and need everything in one pane of glass. Thanks to our company, Turn Digital, for sponsoring. They help keep the lights on, bills paid, and pizza provided. So that all being said, I want to take us to our main event. We have Matt Jimison ready to talk to us about Advanced Copilot Studio. So Matt, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Just one moment, and we'll get started. Is everyone able to see that okay?
That's great.
Roger
All right.
that.
Awesome. All right, we'll start out. I want to thank actually first the group for having me back. I actually spoke here last year, had a great time, and so love being back to the group. And so thank you again. That means a lot. A little bit about me. So I got my Bachelor of Science in Computer Graphics Technology with that design background. I've got 19 plus years of experience really working across IT. So whether it's an architect, a developer, a consultant, in my previous role, I was actually a managing director of a Microsoft consulting practice within a larger consulting firm. And I got started with SharePoint. That was my entry into all of the Microsoft technology for the most part back in 2008 with SharePoint 2007 or MOS, and was a .NET dev, and they were looking for someone to learn that. So have been through a lot of the different changing stories of development all the way back, but I never worked with 2003. So I know some folks who have, I have not, didn't have that experience. Maybe that's good or bad. I currently serve as the head of Copilot and Microsoft 365 apps at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And so, which we've got our office right there really close to you all, and love spending time with family, playing video games, grilling. I've got a Kamado grill, so hit me up offline if you're interested in that. Also love craft beer and bourbon as well. So that's just me in a nutshell. I also am an MVP in business applications as well as in Azure AI as well. So the agenda today is going to be one, I want to explore some sort of advanced concepts that aren't necessarily the first thing that you see in a lot of the buzz about Copilot Studio, a lot of the buzz which is around generative AI, but I do want to actually jump into a few things around generative AI stuff that, again, I don't know that's necessarily front and center, but it's really powerful. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. And then going to be doing a couple demos on one around creating a custom feedback system around generative AI and extending user properties, being able to essentially know more automatically about your user to personalize the chat experience. We'll do a brand new demo that I put together just for this presentation about an agent API we're going to end up developing one copilot that actually talks to a group of copilots in a single conversation. So looking forward to doing that and getting feedback from you all on how that works. And then we'll do a few Canvas tips to round it out. So we've got a full agenda, so we will go ahead and get started with, again, sort of focusing on generative AI tips. So I want to highlight a couple things really quick, and these are the really quick hits here, right? Some of them you may be familiar with, but one of the things that changed a few months ago in Copilot Studio when we shifted sort of to this knowledge mantra was the fact that we could now have our agent be able to utilize general knowledge. And if I could sum it up, what does that mean? It essentially allows your agent to be sort of ChatGPT-ish because it allows it to respond to essentially any type of question. It doesn't have to be grounded on your data. Before this was here, it was relying on either having an answer in one of your topics or one of your sources. This sort of opens up a window into the rest of the world, and it is something that is going to always be turned on by default. But if you don't want the outside world in your bot, you can turn it off with the flip of that toggle. The next thing that is interesting that's changed here somewhat recently that I wanted to address really quickly is when you're grounding your agent on a public website, you're now going to see a new column where it's going to ask you to confirm that you are the owner of this website. I'm not sure if anyone has seen this here, but if your question is, well, what if I don't own the website? Is it not going to work? It will work, whether you mark it as owning or not. My guess, to be honest, is this is maybe sort of analytics for Microsoft to understand who's building experiences around this feature that own these websites. But I can tell you that it does work whether or not. You'll actually see that in both cases later today. Just something to point out. And there's really no additional information on this on their website other than saying that they want to know if you own it. We're going to talk about something that I feel is really powerful, and again, in the Gen AI space, sort of hidden, which is this idea of topic inputs and outputs. And it's going to take us from experiences where we're putting in every single question node, collecting information from the user, to turning it into just a full-on Gen AI experience where we can tell the model what we need and allow it to facilitate the conversation. We don't have to get into the process of building out all those variables and nodes manually. And so it's really cool, and we'll see that. And then dynamic chaining, which is we're going to specifically look at the truly creating a chain of events that we'll be able to see how that works. And the other thing that we're going to be doing with almost all of these is needing to turn on the generative AI capabilities. These are still in preview, and it's something that you're going to have to turn on to be able to take advantage of things like dynamic chaining, et cetera. And so we'll see that as well. And then one more note before we get into now lots of demos is when we talk about dynamic chaining, they're essentially three main sources that could be involved in dynamic chaining. You have your knowledge that you're adding, it could be SharePoint sites, it could be public websites, etc. You have your actual topics that are being triggered. And again, we're going to look at sort of the inputs and outputs of that. And then you may also have actions that are added directly that are meant to do things, such as the sort of the hello world of actions with Copilot Studio, which is like the MSN get weather action. So those are the three types of things that we can chain together, and being able to sort of take an output of one and to use that as the input of another one. So those are just the three main categories that I wanted to highlight. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and flip into demo mode. And let me get back here. All right. So we are going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and click on a site that I've actually already got. And again, once this loads here, just to quickly recap a few of the things that we talked about. So when we were talking about this knowledge, that's going to be again right here at the start, right? Whether we want to enable that or not. So that's where you're going to find that information. And as far as the, again, sort of adding a public website. So let's say that I wanted to actually add the website for this user group here. I could do that. And if I go back here and put that in, then I'm able to do that. And again, it's going to see right there with the ownership, which is not going to matter, like I said. So we won't add that for now, but I did want to highlight that really quickly. And we'll go ahead and leave that. All right. And moving right along here. So topics, inputs, and outputs. So what we want to do here essentially, and to save a little bit of time, I'm actually going to take a topic that I've already got put together and I'm going to paste it just to be able to sort of seed the thing here. So we're going to go ahead and add a new topic from blank. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll explain everything that's happening in here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and replace this. And this is basically a topic that allows the user to order coffee. So I'm going to say, order coffee as the name of the topic and allows a user to order coffee. And then let's go ahead and save that. And let's dig into this whole input output thing once that's saved.
Hey, Matt, would you be able to zoom in maybe to like 150%?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Go. Looks like it's kind of, there we go. Okay. That look better?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. No, thank you. Okay, so if we go to the details of this topic, and I do want to mention actually one other thing really quickly here, so that if I go back into the settings and I go to the generative AI space here, again, I've got to turn this on to get a lot of these features. And, for me, when I'm doing testing and validation, I like to definitely do low, more creative as far as the content moderation, because I don't want the experience to be limited, especially when I'm trying to see if things work by moderation. So that's something to keep in mind. Wanted to let you all know that that's how we have this set up. Okay.
But Matt, you'd expect to switch that back up to something higher when you go into production.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, based on your needs. Exactly. Yeah, based on how strict you want it to be. But yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so we've got this topic, order coffee. You can see we've got the Gen AI features on here because we've got instead of having trigger phrases, right, we see that we're just telling the model, what does it do? Well, topic allows the user to order a coffee. Pretty simple. But if I click on details, this is where I start to get a lot more information and where we get this input output. So, here I can give the name and description of just the topic, but then you see I have different fields to give the name and description for the model. This is what the model needs to understand what this topic does. By default, what you put here will get filled in here. So that's pretty standard, but one of the other things that's maybe sort of more hidden is this ability to create inputs. And again, I mentioned that, if we would have built this 6 months ago, what we probably would have done is we would have created a topic. We would have come in here and we would have said, ask a question, right? And we would have said, what size of copy do you want, right? Et cetera. And we're not going to do that here, but that's what this essentially is replacing. So when I go in here, I'm saying I have an input, it's going to be the coffee size, and it's going to be a string, and it's just the size of the coffee. And I'm basically telling the model, you fill it out, to the best of your ability. I still have the additional settings, if it should prompt me, if it's not there, all of these other things, we won't get into that. But I do have a lot of the same control as far as inputs, even of actions and whatnot go. So all I've got is coffee size, and then I've got type. And then that's it, right? So two input variables that this thing needs in order to run. And then if I look at the output, this output is just going to be the cost of the coffee. And I've got a fun little formula in here just to make it feel like it's real. I'm generating a cost, a random cost between $4 and $10. So if you're wondering where these things are coming from, obviously what's really going to be happening here is whatever action you're calling, whatever Power Automate flow that you've got to like really make a coffee order. The important thing I want you to get on the outputs is, let's say if we're doing an ordering system, like obviously the price is something people are going to want to know. There's probably some sort of confirmation ID that they're going to want to know. Maybe they're going to want to know the time that it's delivered. I can add all of those things by these outputs. So right now, again, I'm sort of keeping it simple with just price. So if we want to see how this thing works, we can say something like, I'd like a large black coffee. And we will go ahead and leave the page because that's fine. We didn't make any meaningful changes there. Okay, and it looks like I forgot that I already actually had this topic in this, so that's okay. So we will go ahead and click one of those off. All right, and refresh this again, and now, one of the things that we're looking at here on the left is what's called the planner. And this is where you get to see what the model thinks it needs to do and what it's going to do next, et cetera. So you can see that by saying, yeah, if we look at the message, right, your large black coffee has been ordered, price is 561, enjoy, that's great. But if we look at the inputs, again, it was able to determine that the coffee size was large just based on sort of this informal text. Now, if I said, I'd like to order another coffee, then what's going to happen here? Well, in theory, I still need to order a coffee, but now I haven't indicated to the model what size of coffee I want or what type I want. And so you can see that it's sort of taking charge here. So what size do you want? Large. And then it's going to ask me what type of coffee, and we're going to just say a latte. And so once the information is there, again, you're able to see that it's able to get that information back out. And so that's how that works in a nutshell. And now let's say, and so that sort of is the kind of the input output part. But one of the other things that I want to talk about is the dynamic chaining and the fact that the model can be intelligent enough to do multiple things. So let's say that actually I need to order for friends as well. One needs a medium, I can type here, medium cappuccino, and the other needs a small decaf, please. Okay, so that should result, right, in the model needing to call twice, right? And indeed, it actually does. So you can see here that this one prompt from me causes it to call the order coffee topic once for the medium cappuccino for my friend, and then again for the small decaf for my friend. If you're wondering why the price is always the same, I flipped off the random topic and the other one was just a static value. So that's why everything is 561 at this coffee shop, no matter what you're ordering. But you can see that it's able to respond once. And so this is sort of part of that experience of dynamic chaining, right? But I want to give you an even better experience because this isn't so much inputs and outputs as it is, being able to come up with a plan for multiple things. So if I go back to this and I'm on my same bot here and I look at my knowledge, I have my website right here, mattjemison.com, as one of the knowledge sources. I also have a topic in here that is for stock prices. And if we'll just take a look at it, you're going to see it's actually the exact same thing I've got here, right? My stock prices gets the stock price of a given company, and the input's going to be the company stock symbol, where I'm telling it the stock ticker symbol of the given company must be a valid symbol. And then what it outputs is one thing, which is just the price. And again, this is where you would really call whatever stock your favorite stock API is. In this particular case, I'm actually choosing to just put down a value between $13.50 to $14.50. So what does that mean? Okay, well, now I want to do two things at once. I want to say, what company does Matt work at? And what is the price of its stock? So we'll see what happens with this activity map in the planner and see what it gets. So the first thing that it's going to do is it knows that it's going to need to get information from my website because it doesn't know where I work, right? And so this is when I talked about sort of the three buckets and that we have knowledge, we've got topics, and we've got actions. So the first thing it did was go ahead and view the grounding of my website to figure out where I work. Now, it knows that I work at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. My website doesn't mention the company stock symbol. So you'll see how when I'm doing those inputs and outputs because they're interacting with generative AI by saying like I need you to fill this in for with the stock symbol of the company, it was smart enough to take Takeda Pharmaceuticals to be able to populate this as TAK. And again, I'm just outputting a random stock value here. But now you can really see the dynamic chaining, unfold, right? Where it was requiring one thing's output, right, which was where I work, as the input, which was even essentially transformed by the model into TAK into another output. And so that's how that works. And it can do another thing here too, or I could say how much are the shares of TAK that I own worth. This is not real, again, information, but I've got two different topics. I've got a shares one, right, that goes and it can just pulls a fake number in here that pulls that in here, and you can see that it's saying like that my account looks like I own 235 shares. It knew that the price was $3.70 already, so it's coming back in here and just telling me that this is what that's worth. So another sort of example of that dynamic chaining. So hopefully that helps sort of demystify how that works. But I think once you see this, you can quickly envision a lot of really cool experiences, where you're not having to, in a sort of traditional model, line up all of those inputs and outputs, right? It can be much more open, and the model's able to determine on its own what it needs to do to sort of make that happen.
Nice, Pat. Thank you. It's good.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so the next one that we're going to work on is custom feedback. So inside of Copilot Studio, when we're doing the testing, one of the things that we're seeing every time that we invoke knowledge is this down here at the bottom, just now surface with Azure OpenAI, do you like it or not? Well, there's two things about that. One, that's feedback for Microsoft. It's not feedback for me. It's not feedback my organization gets to see. And two, more importantly, once I actually deploy this bot to a channel like Teams, it doesn't show up, right? It is just here in the Copilot Studio UI for the test UI. I put it in Teams. It's not even going to ask. I can't even give Microsoft feedback from my end users at that point. It's just going to be here for me. So we want to take this idea of I want to get feedback, right? You have so many generative AI things going on. Wouldn't it be great if users could quickly tell you whether they liked the answer or not? And not only that, but give you a little bit of information. That's what this next section is all about, to be able to do that. So what we're going to be looking at in my PowerPoint is freaking out here, is getting it to this, right? With this looks good or needs work. Okay. So let's talk about it for really quickly. One, again, we're building on generative answers, generative AI. So if you're doing anything with generative AI in Copilot Studio, this is something that should work with all of it. Two, it's going to use an adaptive card. That's how it's going to appear as an additional, option after the end of the response for the users. And it's going to be triggered by a message event, which is a type of topic type trigger that's not necessarily as common. We're going to scope it so that we make sure it only runs when we're trying to pass it data. So think of it, it's like we're almost posting a form, like if you think about sort of, website development, we're posting that to another topic so that it can do something with it. But it needs to be passive because we don't want to pop a question at the end of every time we give you an answer and say, did you like that? Right? That'll really annoy people if we do that. The idea here is you're going to be able to take that information and do whatever you want with it. We'll show you really quickly sort of how to take that information and use it inside of application insights. But you could do whatever you want with it. You could do approvals, whatever. But the idea is that if you have users that are sort of hesitant saying, I still don't know, the quality's not great, I don't know what people are thinking, and I'd love to be able to tap into that. That's what this allows you to do in a relatively painless fashion. So, all right, now let's go ahead and go over here. And so we're going to go ahead and create a new bot, and we'll just create a new agent. And we're just going to skip to configure for now, and we're going to say still feedback agent test, and we're going to go ahead and create. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier about this sort of common knowledge is super helpful for us because that's what we want to take advantage of. So we can see if I say, how tall is Michael Jordan, right? That's obviously I've not grounded any kind of information on this, so it shouldn't know. And provided that the bot's developed enough, yep, okay, so we're good. That we could see 6'6", and again, that's here. Okay, how does that all work? Well, if we go to our system topics, that's all happening inside of conversational boosting. And so if we look at this where we're creating generative answers, we're going to make some changes here, a couple changes that are really important to make this work. We're going to go to advanced. One is we're no longer going to have the model provide the answer automatically. We want to sort of have full control of what the experience looks like. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we want to save the response. Obviously, we need its response so that we can still give a good response back to the user. And it's interesting because it by default says text only, but it recommends a complete response. And that's exactly what we want to do. So now we have this variable in the topic called answer. And if I come in here and I say send a message, and then I use a message node and add in here with my variables answer.text.markdown content, let's go ahead and save that and then see if we still have essentially the same experience. Okay, so we can see that it's good, but notice that we don't have this surface with Azure OpenAI anymore because again, we control it completely now. That's gone, and that's what we want to change now. So what we can do here is we can add an adaptive card. This is going to follow the actual message, and I am going to again sort of skip over to a different area here, and I love to use the adaptive card designer to sort of start to figure out like what do I want my card to look like. And I've done that already. And you can actually see here when I'm just using JSON, I get a preview right away, right? So this is what we're doing. We're adding looks good or needs work to the bottom of it. And that's good, but the reality is that this wouldn't do anything other than just show two buttons that do nothing. Because if I look in it, what I'm doing is I'm manually, again, I talked about that data passing. I have these actions, and what I'm doing is I want to pass data so that when someone clicks on them, there's going to be a message event attribute and whether they liked it or not. But this is all hard coded, and I also need more than just these two things. I want to know like what was the prompt? What did the user ask? I want to know how did it respond? Because if somebody in my organization is telling me this isn't good, we didn't like the response, well then I want to make sure that I get all the details that I can on it to understand it and really feel in control of at least seeing what they saw. So that's a good start, but we're going to have to flip this to formula. And that's going to work fine too, but again, we go ahead to sort of save time. We've now got to, do the work of making this work with our data. And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just get rid of all of that and paste it. And then let's pull it up here and look at it. So what we're doing now is again, we want to control the name of the event because we want to make sure this message event trigger is not going to that fires every time a message is sent. It doesn't matter why, but we can condition it to only run for certain types of messages. That's what we're doing here so that we know our topic only runs when we want it to. Here we're hard coding true because this is the button that they say they liked it. And then system.activity.text, that's always going to be what prompted this to run. So that's going to be what did the user say. And then the topic.answer.text.markdown content, that's coming again from what we're showing. So we're passing in what did the user say, what was the response, and did they like it or not. The same thing down here, it's the exact same, except we're obviously saying they did not like it. All right, so let's go ahead and do that, and we should be good. And if we save this and we do another one, we'll say, now we should at least see a response and we should see our looks good and needs work. But if you're following along thinking like, okay, but what's going to happen? Well, nothing, because we haven't built the topic that actually handles this. And so that's where we need to go to topics, create a new one. We're going to go over here. We're going to change this. We're going to say that this is when topic fires when a message is received. And again, it's the fact that we're talking about starts the topic every time a message is received from the user. So we're going to go ahead and click, we're going to go ahead and click on the message received for now. And now I go to properties. This is where I was mentioning we have a condition. So I want to change this to a formula. And again, to save time, I've got something here that I'm going to paste in. One moment. So I've got a formula that says, essentially, does the value coming over from the activity have a message event property? And if it does, I'm going to convert it to text, and I'm saying, does it equal answer feedback? And so that's what's going to help this thing only run essentially when the message feedback has been received. Now, what we're going to do here, we can put a note here just to know whether it worked or not really quickly and say, thanks for your feedback. Glad you liked it, right? Which we'll do something more with here in just a second. Okay, we're going to do this. We'll say custom feedback for the name of our topic. And we don't necessarily need to worry about a description here because, again, we're not having anyone interact with it directly. So now let's go ahead and refresh this. And let's go ahead and say, let's wait for bot and say, what is the average speed of a cheetah? Okay, so the average speed here, right? We say, okay, that looks good. All right, so thanks for your feedback. Glad you liked it. But again, not necessarily much because we haven't done anything meaningful with the feedback. So this is where the rest of this comes into play to make the magic happen. So we're going to go to variable management and we're going to parse a value. What value are we going to parse? Well, we're going to parse the system, the activity dot value, which is where all of that information is going to come from. That's the same thing I looked at to see the message event. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to do this from sample data, and I have an example of the type of information. This is again, we're fully in control of this because this is what we actually gave it, right? So I'm showing it, well, you're going to get a message event, which is a string, a Boolean value on like, prompt, and response or string as well. That's going to allow this to type this out now. And so now we've got a variable, and let's go ahead and create a new one, and we can just call this like user feedback. All right, and so now what we can do is a few things. One, we can go ahead and change this to a condition, and we can say if the user feedback dot like, right, we could say, we could say thanks, glad you enjoyed. And we could say if they didn't like it, maybe we want to say, I'm sorry you were disappointed with the result. And this is where I would say, if you wanted to take this further, you could not, instead of just saying you're disappointed and I'm sorry, but to actually ask the user for feedback, right, that you could potentially collect. But let's just save this for now. And let's go ahead and click on this one more time on the looks good. And okay, so if we look here, we've got user feedback, and let's see, activity.value needs work. Let's refresh this. We'll do the same thing with Michael Jordan. Okay, and it looks like it's coming back because it thinks that we don't have that feedback here. So let's take a look really quickly. Variables with our test. So we've got our user feedback record. We can see that it is like is true. I did not fill the rest of this in. I said is equal to blank. So let's fix that. We don't want to do a software update right now. All right, save that and refresh it one more time. Okay, looks good. Thanks. Glad you enjoyed it. Needs work. I'm sorry you're disappointed, right? So now we're sort of shifting the conversation based on that. But the last thing that I want to do is I want to connect this to App Insights. So I'm going to go over here to Settings, and I'm going to go to Advanced, go to Application Insights. Inside of App Insights, you have connection strings that I can copy this right here, and just all I have to do is just a giant copy paste save. Now this bot is connected to App Insights. And what I can do is after I've gotten that value, And you could alter this, right? If I wanted to ask the user for their feedback, I might want to wait and log it afterwards, but I also maybe don't want to count on them giving me the feedback. But I'm going here in advance and I'm going to say I want to log a custom telemetry event, right? Which doesn't look like much. I've got to go to the properties of this to make it work. And here I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. I'm going to say the name of it is custom feedback. And as far as the properties go, I'm going to go over to a formula. This is again where I've got total control. Like, what do I want to send to application insights that I want it to log? So for here, I'm just going to give it a formula that essentially says that it is the, and we have to make changes here because I didn't use the exact same variable. And so let's say user feedback. And so we're going to log the user system.user.email. So who was the user that's giving us the feedback, the topic user feedback prompt, the topic user feedback response, and then the topic user feedback like. So we just want to log all of those pieces of information. We'll insert that and we'll save that. And then we'll go ahead and refresh this. And now we could say, when was ice cream invented? And again, doing this with the general knowledge, but if you had all of the knowledge that you've added for your organization, you would be able to have this still happen because we're plugging all of this into that conversational boosting topic. So as you enjoyed it, needs work, and you might want to do something right where somebody can't give feedback on something they've already given. If you wanted, you could add that additional logic if you wanted. Now, what that means is, and I've got older data in here because it does take a few minutes for something to show up in application insights. But now I have this nice report where I'm basically querying for that custom feedback name. In this particular case, I'm just getting, everything since the beginning of last year. And then I'm going to have to extend and create new properties for off that custom dimensions, the user one that we gave, the prompt, the response, and whether they liked it or not, where we're converting it to a Boolean and then projecting those out. And then I'm also saying the name of the Copilot is this Cloud Role instance. So you could use this if you wanted to across a variety of copilots, and then you could filter essentially if somebody wanted a report for just theirs. But you can see here that now I'm getting this information. You can see from my limited testing earlier that I've got all these prompts, the responses, whether the user liked them or not. So really allows you to sort of take that generative AI experience, kind of put it into your own hands, put a human in the loop on it, and to be able to collect feedback from users, versus sort of having people use it and say like, that was horrible, that's not what I was looking for. This at least gives them an avenue to be able to reach out to you and let you know. All right, so that is sort of the idea of custom feedback now. All right. So the next thing, speaking of our users, is, and we watched some of this actually happen when we were taking like our system.user.email, right? Like we've got a user that is logged in. And so because they're logged in, we know several things about them, which is great. Like we know their name, their first name, last name, their ID, their email, etc. But the thought around this one is, but what if I need to know more? Like, what if I wanted to know where they lived? What if I wanted to know what department that they were from? And I sort of just wanted this to be easily accessible, just like the system variables are. Well, that is what we're going to do in this next particular demo. And really, the goals are, one, again, extend what I know about the user, right, beyond just those limited properties that I have out of the box. Two, I want to be able to add new ones in the future. So right now we've got a few that are going to come in, but you think about if you wanted to pull information from Workday or whatever system, you could easily roll that into this model that I'm about to show you. And then three, cache data optimized performance. So I don't necessarily want to query for all this information every single time. I don't want to also have to worry about whether I have queried for it, etc. So I'm going to show you another sort of hidden thing, I think, inside of Copilot Studio that you can do that's not necessarily super evident. All right, so now we're going to go into demo mode. Okay, so let's go back to Copilot Studio. We're going to go ahead and create a new agent, and we're going to say skip to configure. We'll say user details and go ahead and create this. All right, so now we've got our user details agent, and what we want to do is create a new topic, and we want to go ahead and create from blank, and we have an action, and let's jump over that and show you really quick. called user properties. That is something I've already added. Again, this could be reused. That's not going to be a problem. What's coming into it is the user email. And on this, again, super simple example, I'm querying the user profile service off of that email. And then I'm creating a JSON object where I'm going to go ahead and pass in the city, the state, the country, and the department. So these are four things that you cannot get out of the box that we can get pretty quickly from their profile. So we're going to just take that and run with it. Now, I want to give back to Copilot Studio. It's still picky about what types of things I return to it. So it would not like me if I gave it back JSON right away. So I'm converting that JSON to a string, and that's what I give it back is a string full of that data. So if we go back to our topic now, understanding that, we want to do call an action, and we can see that we don't see our actions in here, which can happen sometimes on new ones. We're going to go ahead and say ensure user, save this, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and refresh. This is a tip that has worked for me in the past when you sort of, it looks like you've got your new agent, but all of a sudden it doesn't seem to understand that you have flows in that environment. We'll see if it worked. All right, it looks like it's thinking, and now you can see that did help. And so we've got user props. So again, I've got to tell it the email address that I want coming in. So that's going to be the user.email. Now, by default, all of these copilots that we create have authentication set up for Teams and Power Apps. That's why this value exists. If you obviously had an anonymous bot, this would be a problem because you wouldn't know this. But this is something you're going to want to do authenticated. So I'm going to call this, and I'm going to get out of it this user object string, which is pretty cool, but like it's a JSON object, right? We talked about like it's a lot of properties, and it's not going to be very fun to work with that as a string. And so because of that, we're going to need to do one other thing, and that is we're going to go ahead and go down to variable management. We're going to parse a value, and the value that we're going to parse is this object. And actually we're not going to do this. I'm sorry, we're going to set a value, and we're going to variable management, set a variable value. It's going to be this thing. And then the value, we're going to use a formula, and it's going to be this, where we're going to put this in. And to do that, we need to change this thing to a global thing. And once we do that, we'll save this. And then now we want to do this. Okay, so we'll say formula and then paste that in again. Now we're good to go. And we'll insert that, and let me show you what we're doing here. All we're doing is, again, we know that we were giving back a string that had those properties for city, state, country, and department. That's all we're doing is basically reparsing those.
Why did you have to change it into a global? Sorry, into a global variable. That's weird.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're actually going to get to that in just a second. And it actually doesn't. Yeah, no, really good question. And it all comes down to sort of how this works. And let's go ahead and do this one more time here. So we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to call this, let's see, user info. And we're going to say that it's global, and we're going to put this in formula. So I was having a hard time basically understanding what the type was there, and based from when it was switching it around. Okay, so question, yes, why did I change it to global? This is sort of the secret sauce here. There is an ability here when when I'm referencing a variable where I can say I want you to go get this value from this node if it's empty. I have this happening in a topic, right, called ensure user, but wherever I want to use these properties, I'm not going to have this. So the reason that it needs to be global is so that I can refer to these values in other topics. So the idea of this topic is that it in reality, like, it never gets called. What's going to happen is, even when it realizes somewhere else that it wants to actually get this value, it's not going to run through this whole topic. It's going to do this node. It's going to basically say, okay, well, somebody's referencing user info. Well, it's empty, so I'm going to go back to this node to get its value. Now, the second thing that we need to do is that this value also, right, the string value, we need to have that set automatically. What's really cool here is that when this one gets referred to, it tries to refer to this one, which is empty, and then that actually calls Power Automate, calls this flow, grabs the string, which allows this one to parse it. And so by having these get the values automatically, and I'm going to save this and double check that nothing got flipped off, so that we still see it. So this one, yep, we're going to get the value if it's empty. This one, we're going to get the value if it's empty. So now when I go to my topics, let's take it at, like, this is our starting conversation start, right? Hello, I'm user details, etc. And now let's say that we want to say, let's just get actually rid of all of this and say, it looks like you're reaching us from, then now we have that global property. So we can say, city, comma, and we'll do state. And we could say, nice to have you here. And then now we could even combine this with the system variables, right? Where we say user dot display name. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, and it's going to want, because of the way that these credentials are set up, for me to provide these. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. It should just take another second or two. Perfect. Go back in here and say that we want to retry it. And you can tell, right, by the fact that it came in here and it's like it was automatically saying, oh, you referenced user info, it doesn't have a value. It goes back to that node, but not the entire topic, and says, this is where I get my value. That value references another value that's told to basically get its value if it's empty from Power Automate. So now I've essentially only initiated that flow when I actually wanted to pull in that information, and I can use these because they're global across all of the topics, just like I did here with the user.display name, which is a system, right? I've got it. It's not in here. It's a separate variable, but I can use it the exact same way to sort of extend that experience. And, you could do a lot of things in here too, and we won't for time perspective, but, if you think about things like weather, getting the weather, right? Like if I wanted to automatically start to default like the location of a call like that to the user's location, I can reference these variables in there just like any other variables to be able to pull that in. So that's what that looks like. Again, I think, the sky's the limit here based on your particular needs. But, if you've ever looked at this and said, like, I'd like to be able to, automatically refer to more information about the user than just the name or just the email address, because we've got this information coming from these other systems, et cetera, this is a way that allows you to do that. Okay. The next thing is, and this is sort of the last large thing that we're going to be covering. This is going to change. I'm not going to get into what happened at Ignite, just, like at the beginning of the call, right? But we have today, right, without any additional things, an ability to programmatically access Copilot Studio agents through an API called Direct Line. That's what we're going to do. There's a lot of information around this in Ignite, an agent SDK, et cetera. But the important thing I want you to understand is that you may have at times a need to programmatically access your Copilot. Maybe you want to, in a Power Automate flow, for example, call on a Copilot, get back its response, and to use it automatically. You don't need a user to talk to it, right? But you need all of the logic that's been built into it to be executed. So that's sort of the use case here. So if we go into the demo, I go over to Microsoft Power Automate, and I'm going to pull up one of my flows. I started out with this Ask Copilot Studio, just a manual action, right? So what are we doing here? Well, one of the things that we need to do, and for simplicity's sake tonight, every bot that I'm calling, it does not have authentication. If it's not a problem if it does, but then we have to set up that bot with manual authentication and to be able to make these calls. And I'm happy to provide more information of that, about how that works on my blog afterwards. But we've got basically a direct line security secret, and that's what I've pulled in. And I'll show you over in Copilot Studio saying, well, where did that come from? You can get that information. So like on this MJ site here, if I go in and I go into the settings, the security, and then the second option here is going to be web channel security. I've got these two secrets. And so all I did was copy one of these, and that's what's pasted in here. And now I want to, because I'm using Power Automate to do this, right? Like it takes time, for an agent to respond. So and to do this, there's a variety of ways. This is actually what the Copilot Studio kit does. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it. It allows you to test sort of what responses you get back. I took a different path than what they did. They essentially put a delay in there and sort of hope they've delayed long enough for there to be a response. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically see how many activities have happened. And what the first thing that I've got to do is call the direct line API to generate a token. And to do that, that's where I needed that secret. So this is the Copilot ID, so that's coming in here. And after that, I want to actually parse the response coming back. It's going to come back with a token, when it expires, and an ID of a conversation for me. So I want to grab that information. Now I'm going to call another direct line thing where it's starting a conversation. This changes because now the bearer on this is not the secret from the bot, it's the actual token that I have in that conversation. So now at this point, I've got a token and I've started a conversation with it, but I need to actually really start the chat. This just sort of initiated it. Okay, so here I'm calling the direct line API, and you can imagine, new API comes out, right? This could change, could be simplified. First thing that I need to do is I remember I talked about how I got not only a token from this, but an idea of a conversation. So I'm actually putting that into the path. So I'm looking at a specific conversation and I'm passing one activity. It's a message. This I'm just saying it's from Power Automate. This could be updated if you needed it to. And then I'm going to put in text when I manually kick this thing off and that it's going to return. And that's what all I'm doing, right? So I've got it to a point where I can basically pass an input. If everything works well, then it's going to go to this particular bot. And then the last thing is, again, on an authentication standpoint, I've got to use the same body token coming back. Okay, at this point, I'm going to wait 2 seconds. It's going to take some amount of time, right? I'm going to get the response, which is going to use that same body, but it's now going to be a get, and the bearer token is going to be the same here. You can see, here when we started the conversation, we were posting things to it. Now all we're doing is saying, like, show me what that conversation is. What we're going to do is we're going to grab the number of activities it came back with. So we're looking just at length, body, get response activity. So how many things are in it? And now on until it has a response, all we're going to say is the number of activities we have more than one. The reason is that we know the user is saying something and that's one activity, right? But if we want to know whether the model responded or the copilot responded, there has to be more than one, right? Otherwise, we're still waiting for a response. This means that if it takes 2 seconds, it takes 2 seconds. If it takes 10, so be it. But it's a little bit more dynamic and won't rely on extra large delays, right, to get us what we're looking for. Then we parse the response. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but this is what this looks like. It is a whole lot of a lot what it comes back with initially, and then we ultimately filter it because what we're trying to say here is that we want to look for the response. The activities come back in this, and we want to look at them where they're a message, and we want to look at them where they're from the role of bot. So this will basically give me just the responses from the bot. It won't give me anything else from the user. And then once we have that, the very last thing that we want to do is we want to basically say, hey, I'll just take the first one of those and I'll just go ahead and I want the text property of that. So we haven't made any changes to this. And again, this is using, my particular website. This is the one that I've got it on is the MJ site. So I can say how do you handle adaptive card errors in Microsoft Teams? I've got a couple things that are about that. Go ahead and click done. And now we can go ahead and see, right, what's happening. We generate our token, parsed it, started the chat. It's still waiting for the response. So that's where we're going to be able to see the loop running here. And we will give it a second. And now we can see that it's done. And again, if I look at this response, it is a lot of stuff. But if I get down to the messages and I get down to our output, this is what I care about, right? So to handle adaptive cards in Microsoft Teams, use these steps, blah, blah, blah. This all came from the Copilot, right? You can see that even to the point of all of the references and everything like that. So that's pretty cool and sort of like, okay, well, I programmatically accessed it, but the thing that I did on the demo is I took that and I created a copy of that flow and I changed its trigger to be from Copilot Studio. And now I'm actually passing in the bot that I want in the prompt. And so the way this works is a copilot can call this, pass in a secret for another copilot, pass in what the user wants to know, call it, and then all it does is it does everything we just saw, and then it responds with the response. So if I go back to Copilot Studio, I'm going to go ahead. I created a bot called the Bot Father, right? Because it's in charge of all the bots. And I've got a couple topics that I added in here. Okay. And get the idea, hopefully, that this would be really pretty easy to expand. I've got a tech question topic. Well, this, again, building kind of everything we've looked at tonight. What comes into this thing where the details is this, you use this topic, right, to answer technical questions on the Microsoft Power Platform, Teams, SharePoint, and Azure. The input is going to be a prompt, and the description is going to be a standalone question that does not require any additional context to understand. This is again where I leverage generative AI to shift from whatever you said to give me a standalone question because I'm passing it to this other agent. That other agent's not in our conversation really, right? It's just sort of, answering one question at a time. I need to give it something that it can answer without that additional history. Now that's the tech questions, and then I also wanted to add more. So I've got sports question. I have a bot that was grounded with the ESPN website, CBS Sports, etc. Right? So it has all of this information about sporting things. And well, again, if I look at it and here it's the same thing, right? It's the standalone question does not require additional context to understand. But in both of these topics, you'll see all I'm doing is calling the flow that we just looked at, and I'm passing in the secret of that, and I'm passing in the prompt that generative AI is going to help me with. Well, what I end up with here is I could say something like, how do I extend user properties in Copilot Studio, right? Because I have a blog post on what we just looked at. So now we go to the planner and we look at the planner and we see what's happening. Okay, well, this is a good start, right? Which is first off, it realized, well, they asked a question about Copilot Studio, which is part of Power Platform. I should use my tech question topic, right? So I get how do I extend user properties in Copilot Studio, right? Now I have an output, right? And again, this was rewritten, based on what it needed to be. And we can see that it's coming back with the output. And so now, even though the bot father has no idea about my website at all, it just talked to the other Copilot and it came back with information from my website, right? With all the steps and information on that, you can see the references and so forth. So now, one more thing that I could do, I could say, what is the current record of the Boston Celtics? This one, again, in theory, right, seems very much like a sports question, and it is. That's good. So we can see it rewrote it to what is the current record of the Boston Celtics. So at this point, we know that it's actually reached out to our sports bot, and here we can see that the current record of the Boston Celtics is 11-3, and they are first in the Atlantic Division. And we get we get our links. We can see where this was coming from, ESPN, etc. Now, these are two very different kinds of topics, right? But I think you can see how if you've built out specific bots with, specific goals and functionality, and you sort of isolated it, you could use this kind of pattern with the direct line to now call them, where I've had this single conversation, right? But I've actually engaged three different Copilot Studio agents to do it. So that's sort of APIs and kind of taking that to the next level. Okay, and then lastly here we're wrapping up is we've a couple things that I wanted to talk about really quickly. One was I wanted to mention it because I had it in the description of the topic. I was going to show you how you could use Copilot, when you go to a topic, and you tell it what you want to do, right? Where you could use it to generate this other kind of node. It's a for each node where you're able to essentially associate it to a table of records and be able to give it a value for that for a current record, an index value if you wanted to see what the index of the loop was, and you could build something on top of it. But and what it looks like is this, right? So you have loop through a list. I want to loop through my locations table. I want to give a record of location. That's the value. And then now I'm basically outputting the name of the location, right? Pretty cool. Like if you're wondering, like, what would you do this for? Like imagine if you needed to ask a user for like three pieces of the same information, but you didn't want to necessarily hard code it because maybe it's not always three, right? This is where you could do that. But what happens is like, even just this week, and I know with Ignite and all the changes, it was very unreliable, right? Copilot right now does not want to render it. And so to do it, you have to know the YAML, for the for each. It's really interesting to me that the notes for the Copilot releases in September literally mention this. It says the ability to do looping controls. It's not in the UI. And so what I'm saying actually is rather than teach you how to do this, I would just not do it for now, right? For one, you can do a lot of looping with the for all function, if you're talking about a formula. There's also an ability to use a go-to step. So let's say that I ask, the user, how many orders do you have? And then I set that into a variable. I could do a condition, right, where I could say if, set another index variable to 1, and I could say if the value of that index is less than or equal to the total, ask the question, and then, at the end, if it's still less than that, like use the go-to step basically to just keep reiterating over and over inside of the same thing. I don't have anything on that, but I'm happy if anybody has questions on how to do that afterwards. But I also think that long term that hopefully this is going to be something that officially gets introduced into the UI and you won't have to do anything like that. And then my last two really quick notes before I get to my thank you screen are one, we've been talking about all of these topics, and let's go back. Let's see here. Let's do the one that we created for the feedback agent test. Something that's not super apparent, but something depending on how you like to organize your topics is we can actually, so this condition, right? All other conditions, can actually you see this hover over it. We can actually click on these things and give them better display names. So we can say, if positive feedback right here, if we wanted to rename to give this a little bit more meaning looking at it, and we could say, else negative feedback, however you want to do this. It's not something that's necessarily highly advertised. If we go into the code view and look at how are they doing it, we'll actually see that, let's go down here to the condition group, it's this display name. And funny enough, when I'm in the code view, it actually tells me this display name is not allowed, but that's not true because it totally is. So this is one thing you can do if you want to sort of organize your topics. You can rename this. You can do it everywhere, right? You could say, positive message, etc. Like you get the idea that it's basically anywhere you want to put it. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out. And then the last thing, something to consider really quickly, if I go to the settings, and we'll just save this first, and then we'll go into the settings really quickly. Something else that's in preview right now is component collections. And so I've got the ability, if I want to create new collections, right, that I will associate. So I could say example two, example, and I've only got one solution right now in this environment, but if I have a solution, I could go in here and now I can start saying, hey, these particular topics, right, that I like to use over and over, like let's say my custom feedback topic would be a good example, that I want to go ahead and I want to create them as a reusable component. And the idea would be that I don't have to then worry about recreating, that custom feedback topic, inside of everything. Well, now if I go to another bot and we'll do this like let's say MJ site as an example, and I go into its settings and I go into its component collections, you can see I get to see all of them, right? But if I want to, I can just say add to agent. Well, then what I've done here is I've added those components to this agent, and all of the sort of dependent things on these topics should come with them. But then now in theory, right, I've got this thing where if I want to, I'm going to be able to use that even though I didn't have it in here directly. It is a part of the as a part of the just imported it essentially into the agent. So those are in preview. I have not done a lot with them, but it's it's worth mentioning because again, I think the way things are structured, oftentimes you do have sort of reusable nuggets that you don't necessarily want to continually do over and over and over again. So
Well,
that
Matt,
is the Copilot collections.
What's the scope of the collections? I mean, here it's inside your tenant. Could you export it and move it into another complete tenant?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question. So since it's based on solutions, right, you could take it through that pipeline, and you could, in theory, yeah, you could import it into a number of environments, right, make it available. And, similar to kind of when you think about, other types of Power Platform solutions, like what you might want to do with them. Yeah, this gives you the ability to do that, and to manage them, sort of centrally as opposed to having them in here. In fact, like you don't actually see this. I imported it here, but I don't actually see the topic. But if I go in here and do a topic management, go to another topic, let's see make sure that it did save that in here. Yeah, so it looks like it's here. And let's just look at what's in it really quick again. Custom feedback topic. So we go back here in theory, right? Like we should, again, this is sort of in preview. It should be here in theory, right? But we're not seeing it. So not sure what's going on with that in this particular case as far as why it's not here. Let's see. Maybe it could be something with it could have some recursion or too many bots pointing to the same thing, etc. But that's what that looks like. The documentation on it doesn't necessarily even line up with how the experience works because they say you can create basically component collections from the library. But if you look at this, there's no ability to create a component collection from the library, right? You can create agents from the library and actions, not so. It could be one of those things where with again everything kind of going on at Ignite and all of the changes where it's maybe not yet ready, but I think once it gets there, it can definitely see sort of where it would be a potential good use case, when you're trying to build those types of things out. So that is all I've got, and really again want to thank the group for the opportunity to speak, and happy to ask or answer any questions, anything like that anyone has. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, great job, Matt.
Thank you.
Very
Could you start from the beginning again? I missed that.
I do have some blog posts out on some of these things, and I'll definitely be posting more on some of the newer things that I added in here as well too.
Have you noticed with the new designer for Power Automate that it's been a nightmare and an eye twitch with parts of the components either being missing, not being able to show all?
Yep.
Okay, so it's not just me. Thank you.
The new designer in Power Automate.
Yeah, I find myself having to go back to the older version.
Classic.
To classic.
Yep. I have too, yeah. And even the way that it shows custom connectors, they ironically look better in classic, and they sort of struggle to render the right way in advanced. I like where they're going with it. I do use it more. I do use the new version more and more now, but especially, so I think they have improved it. But yeah, there were definitely a lot of examples in the past where I jumped back to the classic because it wasn't working for me. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, okay. To me, it feels very beta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whole of Copilot's beta. Let's just face it.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions from the group?
All right. Well, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you all.
Wow. All right. So we are. Well, this slide's a little incorrect, but we are doing a call for speakers for 2025. At this point, we're solid throughout the end of this year, but for next year, we have a lot of openings. With all the AI stuff, it's evolving faster than I think any one of us could stay on top of all of it. So if you would like to speak, please do. This is a community where we are both learners and educators, so please don't be shy. On the same token, if you have a specific topic that you'd like to see covered, submit the feedback to Bill, Dave, or myself. We'll try to match up a good speaker that can talk on a given topic. So in terms of upcoming sessions, we are planning to do just a networking social event for December, meaning it won't be in this kind of traditional format. We're still finalizing between December 16th or 17th, but keep an eye out for emails on the newsletter. We'll share more details as we get closer. In terms of January, we might have a little bit of a different shift in format. More to come on that once some more things are finalized, but the date will likely be pushed out to January 30th instead of the typical third Thursday. All right, upcoming community events. There's, of course, a ton of great monthly calls on the PNP GitHub page, everything from Power Platform to Office add-ins to Viva to M365 and Copilot. So definitely a lot more resources out there. We do want to give a quick shout out to some of the other user groups that are here in the Boston area. I can't speak for how many of these are still extremely active. I know Granite State sends to me on a monthly basis. Is anyone running into any problems, or has anyone solved any problems recently that really had you scratching your head?
I got a couple if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
So one of the things we discovered, we're heavy users of forms, and apparently SharePoint's or Microsoft is no longer storing the forms in site assets anymore. It's actually storing it in the documents library, which for us is a problem because we're kind of doing security by obscurity, and now anyone can go in and really delete the data from the forms. So just be aware of that. The second thing we discovered this week was, when we create workflows, my fellow developer and I, we tend to start our workflow under our account, and then we would share it with the service account as a co-owner. We're starting to see workflows where it's requiring a primary owner, and it's deciding which owner is the primary owner, which is the person who started it, and we can't change it. We can't change the primary owner. So we've had to redo. Sorry?
Deb, I've been able to change the owner every single time.
Yeah, we couldn't on a couple of ours.
That's weird.
Yeah. Could not do it on a couple of hours. Again, we may have been getting an update at the moment we were trying to do it, because let's face it, it's been a lot of changes this week. But those are the two kind of lessons I'd say over the last 2 weeks that have hit us.
Yeah, I'll share kind of an interesting thing that we ran into this week. So with one of our clients, in their licensing page, it showed that they had more Defender for Endpoint licenses than they actually were paying for. And we learned that if you have a Teams Room license, that also now comes with Defender for Endpoint. So Teams Room Premium, not the basic. So that's why the counts were being off. So it's kind of interesting. And of course, once we got Microsoft involved, they pointed us to documentation, and that was expected behavior.
Got a Copilot question for you guys. We've got a client who the end user was given a license. We can see they've been given a license. Copilot's been enabled in the tenant. Others can see the Copilot icon, but this person can't see the Copilot icon anywhere. We've rebooted the computer. We've cleared cache on the browser. We can't find the Copilot icon for that person. Anybody encounter that one?
I have seen that in some cases it could take up to a day for it to be reflected.
Yeah.
It's not instantaneous. Unfortunately, you're dealing with a black box step. So
all right, good to know. That's a good point. Thanks. I thought it might be a purview issue. Actually, I think this person was given the license a couple of days ago. I don't think it was just given today, but it's a good point. I'll bring that up. But I'm actually kind of wondering if it's a purview issue, because apparently some of my research showed that there's a purview setting that prevents you from using Copilot. So, but we're grasping at straws now.
Yeah, the one other thing too, if they're not seeing inside the Office applications.
Yeah, they're not.
So one is make sure the Office apps are on the correct release cycle.
Yeah, I brought that up. Yep.
And then for some of our clients, early on in the Copilot days, we actually had to sign them out and then sign them back in for it to take effect.
Good point. All right, I'll bring that one up. That's a good one because literally that's like turning it on and turning off again. So yeah, thank you. Oh, has anyone noticed that Microsoft Designer has gone away? I heavily use it to create my icons and some of my backgrounds and stuff for my SharePoint sites. All of a sudden, I've got to sign out. I try to sign back in, and it tells me it's blocked in my organization. Yet we didn't change any settings. Yeah, and it's in both my dev environment and my prod environment.
Considering Ignite's happening this week, it's highly possible they may be releasing something new to replace it.
Yeah, this probably happened about 4 weeks ago where I started to see that issue, but yeah, I'm hoping they do. I mean, it's a great tool, except for the fact that, sometimes it gives you 3 legs instead of 2.
Yeah, I mean, Deb, it's also possible that your InfoSec team just went in there and started clearing out old app registrations or old
They did, and I
enterprise apps.
checked. Yeah, I checked. They didn't, but yeah. I was curious if anybody else saw that.
Deb, just had an idea for you about your Power Automate problem.
Yep.
Is your Power Automate inside a solution or not?
No, it's not.
Put it inside a solution. You can change it.
Yeah. And I think that's how my colleague Mike fixed the problem with a couple
Yeah.
of ones. I think he moved them into a solution. I'm not enough of a developer. I'm learning how to do that. So
Just do import it, save it, export it, and bring it in. It's very easy.
As far as I know, you've never been able to change the primary, been able to add owners. Now that you put it in solutions, you can do that.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
So we're
the
back.
difference.
So that's the difference. So Paul's right. So once you've exported effectively saved it and then imported back into a new solution, you can change the primary owner.
Right. If it's a solution, you can change the primary owner. But if it's not, it's basically telling me, nope, you can't do that.
Yeah, whoever smelt it, dealt it.
Primary owners.
Pretty much. But here's the problem. I mean, I know for years we've been building workflows this way. So yeah, things are going to break. And I can see where, the last company I worked for, we made sure we had both the other developer and myself, when neither of us work there anymore, and we shared it with the service account. I'm pretty sure those workflows are dead now.
Possibly.
Yeah, even though we try to build it so it wouldn't be.
All right, so thanks again to Turn Digital for sponsoring. We also like to thank all of our previous sponsors, including Microsoft, that generously lets us use the space. But that being said, we've had a lot of sponsors over the 10 plus years we've had this user group, and they've all helped us at different stages of our journey. So thank you to all of them. A lot of these companies are no longer independent companies. They've all been acquired or merged, but it's not a bad thing. So I'm going to stop the recording from here on out. We do have our segment on if anyone is hiring or looking for work.